This sister right here represents how I feel. When I think about all the scrutiny that Black Americans get concerning our musical genres, there's always people in the woodwork trying to claim credit for somehow helping us create these genres. People telling us, oh, you can't claim these genres because it was created in America and all Americans played a part in shaping this music. When you really think about it, what other culture goes through this level of scrutiny? I don't hear no one banging on the Irish or banging on the Latinos or banging on the Asians or banging on the Europeans about so-called influences. You never hear it. Everybody has their music and that's it. But when it comes to Black Americans, it's a different story. Oh, you were influenced by that person, or you was influenced by that person. I had this issue with this guy in England trying to convince me that jazz wasn't Black American music. Try to tell me, oh, well, they use Western harmony. So what? What does that have to do with brothers creating jazz? You take whatever is around and you create something. And that's what we did with jazz. Let's be clear. Jazz is only jazz because of what Black Americans put into it. The improvisation, the ragtime, the blues, the church music, the field hollers, all of that factored into creation of jazz. It doesn't matter whether or not we borrowed Western harmony. So what? That means absolutely nothing. And this is what we get frustrated about. Black people can't create nothing without somebody out of the woodwork saying, oh, you didn't create that without any help. I remember having a conference, not a conference, but a communication with somebody online, right? And I was talking about the great Black inventors. This fool said, well, clearly a white person must have taught that person how to do what she did. We can't do nothing, according to most people, without the help of someone else. But let me tell you, it's a deep-seated jealousy that I find. The fact that only Black Americans go through this and no other group goes through this tells you just how great we are. A friend of mine told me, he said, people are walking amongst giants. And that's what we are. We are giants. So what I want to do something very interesting, man. I want to show the level of hypocrisy that's out here in reference to how they see us in the creation of our music. And I'm going to use, I know people say, man, you're always banging on the Puerto Ricans, but they make the perfect example to illustrate my point because they believe that they're Taino and they believe that anything that comes with that culture is their birthright. Let's hear what Dr. Marie Nieves Colon has to say about her discovery of the mitochondrial or the ancient mitochondrial DNA that is found in modern day Puerto Ricans.
And you've spent 10 years doing that, working on this research, which is remarkable. So what are some of the biggest discoveries you were able to make over the course of your research?
Yeah, so we found two main things with our study. We looked at the genetics of about 124 ancient people that lived in Puerto Rico, at least 1,000 to 600 years before European contact. And we found first that there was a genetic connection between these ancient people and present-day indigenous communities in the Amazon, which suggests that it was Amazonian people who initially kind of peopled the islands of the Caribbean. And we'd also found there was a partial genetic continuity between them and present-day Puerto Ricans. And I say partial because we did also find a lot of genetic diversity that was present in the past that isn't present today. So clearly there was a decline. But the fact that we found 3 sequences that persisted into the present day suggests that this wasn't a complete genetic extinction. that make the Caribbean a beautiful place for vacation, the warmth and the humidity, make it possibly the worst place for DNA preservation. So ancient DNA in general is always degraded and fragmented because we're working with genetic material that has been in bones or teeth for thousands, sometimes hundreds of years. And when it's really hot, that degradation just becomes faster. So in order to deal with those issues, we had to work in extremely clean conditions. So we would take the skeletal remains and we would analyze them in a clean lab, and then we would wear these spacesuits that sort of protect the samples from our own skin and hair so we don't contaminate the samples. And we also have to use cutting edge technology for sequencing these genomes. So for determining the A's, T's, and C's, we have to use these very large and expensive machines. And that kind of technology just wasn't available 10 years ago. So that's part of the reason why it took us such a long time to do.
Of people now living in the Caribbean, in addition to Puerto Rico and some other countries, to discover whether or not the Taino may have mixed with the population of either colonial Europeans or even Africans who were brought to some of these islands, and that DNA you would be able to see that DNA in modern day genetic testing. But has that never been the case?
Yeah, there's been previous research, but most of it has been done with present day populations. So like Puerto Ricans that are living now, like myself or my family, would get sampled and we would look at their genetic diversity. And as you said, we would find that there is a mix between Native American genomes of Native American ancestry and African and European ancestry. But the question that we weren't able to answer through those approaches was how much of that Native American component stems from the island's ancient inhabitants versus coming from Native peoples that came later on, perhaps relocated through the process of colonization or something like that. So we did have previous research in that, it's just that it was different in focus.
Really fascinating. So
now, if you were listening closely to what Maria said, she was asked, can they determine whether or not modern day Puerto Ricans actually have Taino genes? And the answer that she gave was like, well, the science isn't there and probably not. It's probably more to do with recent migration from South America. And here I found an article that echoes the very same thing. It says this: modern DNA studies also point to South America, but they are complicated by the fact that modern Caribbean genomes are largely composed of African and European ancestry, and that only relatively little indigenous Caribbean ancestry remains. Furthermore, it is unclear whether the native component reflects Taino ancestry. Let me say that again. Furthermore, it is unclear whether the native component reflects Taino ancestry or whether it reached the Caribbean as a result of later population movements and migration. The key to solving the limited to mitochondrial DNA and therefore lack in resolution. So, this article confirms what Maria Nieves Colon pointed out. What people cite in their DNA test as Taino is basically wishful thinking. And I'm going to get more into detail in a minute. What I've noticed in my travels, everybody wants to be indigenous. And so that is also true for Puerto Ricans. So I've asked the question, why do Puerto Ricans identify as Taino even though it's unlikely they have Taino ancestry? That's different from Taino heritage. So here's the answer. Puerto Ricans sometimes identify their Amerindian DNA as Taino because of the combination of historical factors, including the widespread belief that the Taino population was completely wiped out by European colonization, leading to a cultural desire to connect with their indigenous heritage, even if their ancestry is more complex and may include other Native American groups, while also facing a lack of recognition for their mixed heritage under colonial systems that often characterize people as either European and African. So that basically is why they connect to Taino. And so let's talk about DNA. All right, let's break down this DNA stuff. Now, when you open up your test results from a DNA company and you see 15, 12, 10, 20% Native American, that does not mean that's Taino representation. That just means you're Native American. Okay? So that's the mistake a lot of Puerto Ricans make. They see that Native American ancestry and they assume it's Taino. Here's the deal with these testing companies. What they do, they test what they call autosomal DNA. All right. And so what they do, they compare that, your DNA, to a reference sample of modern day people, not ancient people, and they determine what your ancestry is. So if you were in fact of Taino ancestry, you would have to have a great grandparent who was full-blooded Taino. And that is very unlikely that you're going to have that, because the Taino people did in fact were exterminated. That's a fact. The genome survived, right? The genome, just as Dr. Maria Nieves suggested, the genome survived in the form of the mitochondrial DNA, which is separate from the autosomal DNA. So 61% of Puerto Ricans carry that ancient genome. That just means that the mother of your mothers was a Taino woman. Now, that's what you inherited, but that does not mean that is your ancestry. Your ancestry is just going to measure like 5 to 6 generations, and that's it. Now, rest assured, when you see that 10, 20, 15% Native American percentage on your ancestry report, understand that it's likely, more than likely, it has nothing to do with Taino ancestry. And as a result of people not understanding how these DNA tests work, you have 40% of Puerto Ricans who have not even inherited the mitochondrial DNA. You see, there's a method to my madness. And this is why I went into the DNA, because I wanted to demonstrate the hypocrisy of some in the Puerto Rican community who say that when Black Americans play an African instrument in their band, that somehow that's an influence. Yet here they are, they're not even Taino ancestral wise. Yet they claim Taino culture. They play instruments from Taino culture, like the maracas and the gyro, right? They play it in their salsa bands. What if I said, oh, that's the Taino breakdown? That sounds ridiculous, right? But yet that's what they do to us. They want us to acknowledge people or groups who had nothing to do with the creation of our music. Now, these people, Puerto Ricans, they adopted and they claim Taino culture. I have no problem with that. You know what I'm saying? Because they feel that it's their birthright. And if they feel that way, God bless them. But me, as a descendant of African people, who's only been, if you talk about the band on the drums, it's only been about 200 years. And I use that marker by the Black Arts Movement and the Pan-African movement, when Black Americans pretty much got reintroduced to African culture. So we have not been away that long compared to Puerto Ricans and the Taino culture. Again, that culture has died long ago. No one was practicing Taino culture until about 50 years ago. And so there's this resurgence of interest amongst Puerto Ricans and Italian culture. So they wear headdress and wear paint, have ceremonies. They do the whole 9 yards. But as I showed you in the DNA, a lot of them are not even linked to Taino people. But this is the way it is. So what I wanted to demonstrate is that if we're talking about ancestry, why is it a influence for me as a descendant of African people to play a conga drum, which was created by African people? Why is that an influence? Why is it an influence if most Black Americans are 24% European? Why is it an influence if I play a European instrument? That is my birthright as well. If you consider Taino culture as your birthright, then that must mean that African or Africa and European is also my birthright. And if those instruments come along with that, that should not be seen as an influence. That is part of my makeup. That's part of my genetics. You see how silly this whole issue about influence, you see how silly it is? Because it's all about an instrument. An instrument is not influence. People are influence. Influence does not equal creation. The music that was created by Black Americans in this country was created by Black Americans alone. We did not team up with any other group to create any genre of music in this country. So enough with the influences. Black American music is our music alone.
Picture this, the golden age of steam engines. Amidst the industrial buzz, a melody played by Elijah McCoy. McCoy's masterpiece, a lubricator, revolutionized machine operation. It replaced manual lubrication with seamless, uninterrupted functioning. This innovation minimized accidents and maximized efficiency. His invention's authenticity popularized the phrase Real McCoy, symbolizing quality. So next time you hear the Real McCoy, remember the man who made machines sing and the world a safer place.